No heroes. No heroes. No heroes, baby.
Hey everyone, welcome to another No Heroes breakdown. This is for their offline regionals that they did in person this past weekend. It was over 500 players with this top 16 that we see here today. And a couple things before we get started. First, if you guys don't know who I am the Eggman. I do a bunch of One Piece content here on YouTube as well as on Twitch. If you guys want any of the deck lists for this event as well for the top 16, you can check out the description for the link to my website, Eggman Events, to check that out. Also, this was the last weekend of the current format for the card game. We have OPO6 and EBO1 legal, but we also have all of the cards that are going to be hit with the restriction list legal as well. So that means Sakazuki, Great Eruption, and Reject are all at full copies for this one, but it will be changing after this week as well. So it's a little bit at like the end of the format as well, because we get that little mini format and then OPO7 on launch as well. So there's a bit of changes going on. There's going to be talk about a lot of the decks as well as they transition to like the half format as well as OPO7, and we're going to look at what that looks like as well. So we're going to check that out. Again, this was a 512 player. This was held by No Heroes. 9 rounds of Swiss, best of 1 into a top 16 cut best of 3 with this top 16 that we see here today. And of this top 16, we do see 9 Sakazuki, 2 Laws, 2 Namis, 1 Newgate, 1 Moria, as well as 1 copy of Star Deck 13 Luffy. And again, this is the last weekend where Sakazuki is going to be legal for tournament play, and definitely went off with a bang because it did win the event and took up over 50% of the top 16. So I think just kind of cementing that, probably the removal of it from the meta is probably warranted at this point. It's been meta since release, and I think it's going to be in a good spot if it wasn't hit on the restriction list, right? So it's a bit of a farewell, but I think it's been one that it's been earned, and we'll have to see that and just kind of see what the meta looks like without this around. And I think the biggest thing that we're going to see on this transition is that Sakazuki was really good at removing a lot of kind of big threats and also kind of getting tempo for those kind of decks as well. So it's going to be a little bit of a meta where I think you can play like your 4-cost, 5-cost cards, and if they stick around, which they're a little bit more likely to now, they get some more pressure from that too. We still have Trafalgar Law still viable, so that will be able to get rid of like 6k and less power cards relatively easy. Moria is still around, which has some removal, but it does miss Great Eruption as well. And then Yellow's going to be around 2, I think, in the next format, but Reject not only was a good finisher, but it was also like kind of like a weird like mid-game removal card if you needed to remove something. So not having that around either, I think it's going to be a little bit impactful. So last thing before we go into the deck list is the leader breakdown. Nothing too spectacular. I will say it is very interesting to see, Moria was the most popular deck by usage, a little bit under 25%, but only 1 was able to sneak into the top 16. Meanwhile, Sakazuki with only 92. So again, like under 20% of the meta was able to take up over over half the top 16, which is really great too. So that's a really good conversion for Sakazuki. Laws about the same. Nami did very well, getting 2 spots in there, and everything else was about either was in the top 16 or underperformed and didn't get in there either. So we're going to talk about the top placing list though for each one of these leaders, starting off with their champion, which is Armand's version of Sakazuki. And again, this is the final week of this boy, so a bit of a farewell. So we don't have a lot to talk about for this moving forward, but I do think it's a really great deck. The biggest thing that I've noticed since EBO1 is of course the inclusion of T-Bone as like just a better 2k that's searchable as a navy, but also the inclusion of Brook, which just sometimes has like some weird points where it's great for like getting some little kind of tiny KOs as well. If you need to be able to do something like like Hina's really good at like getting rid of a bigger body, but if you need to go wider, Brook's really great at getting like the removal for the cards you need to, and then you can use something like Hound Blaze to kind of finish the job, or sometimes like Amma as well. So I think that's something that helps Brook in times, and just the flexibility of the cards are really good. Kuzan's been a little bit more popular, I think. It's good against Yellow, too, if they're, especially with the Reject going away. Yellow doesn't really have a great way to get rid of this Kuzan card, and then if it sticks, they really don't want to play out some of their, like, larger, like, Katakuris or even, like, their Yamatos, unless they can get rid of the Kuzan, because then they can just get the counter removal pretty easy. So we're going to see how decks kind of change with this. I think decks like Gecko Moria is still going to be a really good removal deck, and once we go into OPO7, Rob Lucci's going to kind of take over the reins that Sakazuki left behind, but it's been such a good deck for a long time, and it definitely has its legacy cemented in this game. So congratulations to Armand for giving Sakazuki one more win, and congrats on their finish there. Next up, we've got our runner-up. So this is Tobias with their copy of Trafalgar Law, and I think this is like the next boogeyman that a lot of people have been talking about in this meta. We've been seeing it do really especially well in OPO8 over in Japan, but in OPO7, I think at this little half format that we have, I think Law is going to be a solid deck, but I don't think it's going to be overtuned necessarily. It does have a lot of great tools, especially with the release of like the Bond Clay as well as the Kid and Killer. Both these are great for Bond Clay starting up our extra Dawn, and then Kid and Killer really being able to be a fantastic win condition and just getting us a quote unquote free or cheap 7K rush card is impactful for ending games like this. So I think the deck is in a good spot. It does have some issues with consistency at times. Reiju is such a good card for the deck, but if you're not able to see this, your card draw goes lower, especially since it's not a card that we can consistently find either. And then I also think that we have been seeing like a little bit more of like a top end, and I mean top end by 5 cost, meaning our Eustace Kids, 2 copies of Queen, as well as the Miss All Sunday, which is kind of like an alternative card of Eustace Kid, just because it's able to get us some more Dawn back. We can do something where if we're at 5, we can play Miss All Sunday, -3 Dawn to play out a Sachian Penguin, and then they get the 2 Dawn back as well. So you go back to 5, which is really nice and helps us just get 2 bodies out, especially since Miss Sunday replaces itself, and the trigger effect sometimes comes up too. So we'll see how Trafalgar Laws. I think it's going to be pretty good in the next couple weeks, up into OPO8, where if unchanged, it will probably be the best deck in that format for a while. But I think it's a great pick, and congratulations to Tobias for getting second place with this build here. Next up, we do have Newgate. So this is the guy who just will continue to top, it seems. I think that Newgate had like a bit of a slow start at the beginning of OPO6 in general, but it has just been a solid contender since release. It's been out for over a year right now. This is the build here by Astrids with their build of Newgate, and I think the deck is still great. It is kind of like momentum based in a lot of ways. If you're able to kind of get some good momentum, and it's really good for punishing your opponent for not drawing super well. Being a 6K leader, there are some times where some decks just have a harder time with it. Sometimes Law, even though they can get out a lot of 5K bodies, the fact that you need to be a 6K to be able to pressure Newgate is sometimes a little bit tricky to find that additional Dawn, since you are going to so low numbers to it as well. I do think like Sakazuki was probably one of the better matchups for Newgate though, so it's going to be tricky for it to convert into maybe the little half format that we have, just because I think like Newgate has a bit of an issue with 5 life leaders that aren't sometimes like Anel has a good matchup against this because it's hard for you to be able to put 3 attacks in all at once. We also have like Eustace Kid, which can sometimes be a trouble card for Newgate. Essentially any deck that can kind of prolong the game like an extra turn or two, Newgate definitely starts to lose steam and like the power that it has. So if we transition to more 5 life leaders, especially like with Gecko Moria and Uta, I think in EBO 1.5, it's going to be a little bit tricky for that. But then we'll see what it looks like in OPO 7 as well. I think Newgate will also just find a way to just be a good deck in this format. It hasn't really changed the last couple months, but people are still topping with it, and it's still definitely a force in this one. So congratulations to their finish with Newgate, and we'll see how he transitions into these next formats that we have in the next couple weeks. And then next up, we have our Nami players. So we have Ocon and Fan. They do have 2 different versions of the deck right now, but Nami's kind of like in the same boat as Newgate for me, where there are also kind of like knowledge check decks, right? They play differently than a lot of other decks that exist in this game right now, and if you don't know the specifics or where you're supposed to get the value, you get a lot of value from playing both Newgate and Nami by your opponent essentially misplaying or not playing as efficiently as they can be. So I will say that Fan's list is a little bit more of the standard build, with we just have a lot of the impel down events and just everything else from this one. We do have like Crocodile as like a bit of a, I'd say, cheese ad, but just as like a pressure card later in the game. If you're playing against a deck that can't remove this card, it does get a lot of value throughout the game as well. Just making every event cost one less just gets a lot of additional value, especially on defense, being able to cycle cards like your level up beams, or your white snakes, or even your death wings. There's just like a lot of good targets for this crocodile if it's able to stick in some matchups. And then we also do have the build here from Okan, which again is a little bit more unique. We do have a couple one-ofs, including the noHEROES, which is great for kind of reestablishing a tempo. If you're playing against a deck that just like bouncing back a useless kid or something like that, just making it so you're paying 2, so they have to go back in time and play some other cards, I think is pretty good. We also have like the Boa Hancock, which can get us some additional draws on block. I'm curious to see how good this card was for in general, but I understand like why it could be included in this one. And then also the Usopp, which I don't think we're playing this deck as aggressive. I have seen some builds where you do kind of chip at their life occasionally, and then you kind of surprise them by just going all in at the end. So I don't think that's a cheese strat for this one, but Usopp can get some value, especially since we're playing like Zeph as well for like an alternative way to mill 7. It's a bit difficult to get it out of our hand if it's stuck in there too, because it doesn't have any counter. But I think it's an ad that I think a lot of people won't be expecting if it comes and hits the board. So I don't have much more to say. I think Nami again is going to be around for a while. I think it's also great at like the beginning of formats like EB 1.5 and OPO7, where people are playing new decks or playing decks that aren't 100% optimized. When you're playing a list that's pretty clean and pretty much the same between formats, it's probably going to keep poking up every once in a while. So these are the lists. Congratulations to both of our Nami players. And then lastly, we have 2 more decks. We have our Luffy, who are starting 13 Luffy. So this is Damien's version of the build here. Luffy is kind of in a weird spot in this meta, where I think it's very good. I think Sakazuki was its worst matchup in a lot of ways, just because it could answer cards like your Sabo, which was pretty much like the cornerstone of how this deck works. If you're playing against a deck that can answer the Sabo, you're in a rough time. But if they can't, or they have to spend a lot of resources to remove the Sabo or interact with it, Luffy gets a lot of additional value by being able to go down to like low life totals, but being able to just block out of like really big attacks, or just using a 1k when you're a 9k leader, that kind of thing. So I think that makes sense. That Luffy's going to probably be good in the next format as well. I do think that the Red Purple Law does have some additional ways to get rid of Sabo, so that stinks. But on the kind of flip side, they don't have like great ways to put Dawn into something to make it a 9k. Shiraya though can be like a counterplay. There's just like a lot of back and forth for it, but I think Luffy is good in this format in general, and will continue to be a good pick moving forward. Some additional cards and unusual ones. Perona is interesting. It's just another way to kind of bridge the, like, if there's just so many times when we're at 4 Dawn and we don't have anything better to do, that I think Perona on play isn't a terrible card. We also do have Thunderbolt as a like removal target. Sometimes we just need to get down to 0 life, so being able to get rid of a 5 or less and go down to 0 is pretty clean for 2. And then Amaru to get rid of blockers to try to go for game. We're almost always going to be at 2 or less life, or 1 or less life, so it's pretty easy to get this condition with the leader too. So I don't have much more to say. This is Damien's list, and we'll see what we will go into with the next format there. And then kind of wrap it up, we do have Gecko Moria, which I do think this deck kind of underperformed for this event as well. It was, again, the most popular leader for it, but it didn't get there. It only got 1 in the top 16, and they didn't get past round 1 of Swiss here. But and also, real quick, this is the list here from Selkuk for their build of it there. But this is pretty standard for what Moria is. It is a deck that has to run so many of the pieces that it has. So it has to run your Absaloms, Hogback, and Peronas. It's definitely one of the better decks to take care of Moria, especially since it is searchable in this deck with how Hogback works, which is really nice. We are playing the Rebecca Hina package for this one. I'm a little bit surprised we're not seeing any copies of Brook, because when I play this deck, I do like having those included as well. But we do, if we have the Hina, I think it's already fine for what it is. Rob Lucci as well, being able to get that additional clear. And then I do think this deck is actually going to miss Great Eruption quite a bit. Absalom is great at removing. With the inclusion of Great Eruption and having to play instead like a Suru out or a Helmeppo, to instead get the removal that Great Eruption was getting for no advantage, right? Like for going card neutral. I think that's going to actually be really impactful for how the deck works in general. So I think Gecko Moria is still going to be strong. It's going to be great out the gate as well because it's a deck that you kind of already know what it looks like and you know what the gameplay is. But I think Great Eruption is actually going to be quite the big hit for the consistency and the removal for how this deck works. And I'm going to be interested to see how it moves forward without a key card like this one too. So this is again Selkuk's version of the build, and congratulations for their top 16. So that's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks again to noHEROES for running the event and also letting me do this breakdown video for y'all. Again, if you guys want to check me out, I'm the Eggman on YouTube as well as on Twitch, and you guys can check out all of these deck lists here on my website, Eggman Events, which is going to be linked in the description below as well. So that's going to be it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you again to noHEROES.